Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the command center as Jake Morrison stared at the screen that would change everything. The message had arrived at 600 hours through channels that should not have existed. No human technology could reach across the void between stars, yet here it was, burning bright green letters on his monitor. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and read the transmission again. The words remained the same: cold, final, terrifying. "Sir, you need to see this." Lieutenant Alex Rivera stood behind him, his young face pale with worry. The communication had come through every receiver on Earth simultaneously. Every radio, every television, every computer screen now displayed the same impossible message. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Empire. Their words were simple and direct. Surrender within 72 hours or face complete destruction. No negotiation, no discussion. Submit or die. Jake pushed back from his desk and walked to the observation deck. Below him, the sprawling city of New Geneva continued its morning routine. Cars moved through streets, people hurried to work, children played in parks. None of them knew that their world had just received a death sentence. "Get me President Clark on a secure line," Jake ordered. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. 20 years in the military had prepared him for many things, but not this. The call connected within minutes. Kevin Clark appeared on the wall screen, his gray hair disheveled and his eyes red from lack of sleep. Behind him, Jake could see the frantic movement of advisors and military personnel in the Situation Room. "Admiral Morrison, I assume you've seen the transmission," the president said without greeting. His voice carried the weight of a man who had aged 10 years in the past hour. "Yes, sir. What are your orders?" Clark was quiet for a long moment. In the background, voices argued about response options, evacuation procedures, and surrender terms. Finally, the president spoke again. "How long do we have to prepare?" "According to their message, 71 hours and 43 minutes, Jake replied, checking his watch. "But sir, we don't know anything about their capabilities. They could be here in hours or days. What do you recommend, Admiral?" Jake looked out at the city again. Somewhere in those buildings, his daughter Emma was probably getting ready for school. His wife Maria would be starting her shift at the hospital. "Normal people living normal lives, unaware that everything was about to change. We fight," he said quietly. The president raised an eyebrow. "Admiral, these beings have technology that allows instant communication across interstellar distances. They've apparently conquered other worlds. What makes you think we can stand against them?" "Because they gave us a choice," Jake replied. "If they could simply destroy us without effort, why send a warning? Why give us time to surrender? They want something from us, which means they need us alive. Or they're just being civilized about genocide," Clark said grimly. "Maybe. But I've studied every military conflict in human history, sir. The strong don't negotiate with the weak unless they have to. This ultimatum tells me they're not as confident as they want us to believe." The president was quiet again. In the background, someone was shouting about contacting the United Nations, about forming a surrender committee, about saving whoever they could. "There's something else," Jake continued. "The message came through our own communication systems. They hacked everything we have simultaneously. That level of technological superiority should make conquest trivial. So why the ultimatum?" "What are you thinking, Admiral?" "I think they've done this before. Lots of times. And I think their standard procedure is to send this message, wait for surrender, then move in to occupy a compliant world. It's efficient, saves resources, minimizes damage to infrastructure they want to use." Clark nodded slowly. "But what if we don't surrender? Then they have to fight for what they want. And fighting costs them time, ships, personnel, resources they might not want to spend. You're gambling with the entire human race, Admiral." "With respect, sir, they already made that gamble for us. The moment they sent this message, they told us our only options are slavery or death. At least if we fight, we die on our feet." The president was quiet for nearly a minute. When he spoke again, his voice was steady and firm. "Contact General Barnes, Admiral Blake, and all department heads. Emergency session in 1 hour. And Admiral?" "Yes, sir?" "Start preparing for war." The next hour passed in a blur of frantic activity. Jake coordinated with military commanders around the globe as the reality of their situation became clear. Humanity had been thrust into a war they never asked for against an enemy they knew nothing about. Captain Lisa Harper arrived first for the emergency meeting. As Earth's chief military strategist, she had already begun analyzing their options. Her preliminary report was not encouraging. "We have no space-based weapons capable of engaging enemy ships," she reported to the assembled officials. "Our most advanced spacecraft are barely capable of reaching Mars. If they have faster-than-light travel, they can strike us from positions we can't even see." "What about ground-based defenses?" asked General Craig Barnes. "Our missile systems might be effective if they choose to land troops," Lisa replied. "But if they simply bombardment us from orbit, there's nothing we can do to stop them." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were about to fight a war with stone axes against laser cannons. "There is one possibility," Jake said finally. "They've given us 72 hours. That suggests they're not currently in our solar system, or they wouldn't need travel time. If we can make our surrender costly enough, they might decide to look for easier targets." "You're talking about spite," said President Clark. "Making them pay a price even if we lose." "I'm talking about survival," Jake corrected. "Every resistance movement in history started with someone deciding that submission was worse than death. Maybe we can't win this war, but we can make them remember the cost of starting it." As the meeting continued into the night, plans began to take shape. They would not surrender. They would not kneel when the Zephyrian Empire arrived expecting another easy conquest. They would find something they had never encountered before. They would find humans who refused to quit. The transmission went out on all frequencies 12 hours later. Alex Rivera composed the message that would echo across the galaxy. Short, simple, and defiant. "Since you chose war, we will show you how to fight it." The die was cast. Humanity had chosen its path. Now they would discover what they were truly capable of when everything was on the line. Part 2, the Zephyrian fleet emerged from hyperspace with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Supreme Commander Vexthul stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger on his screens. Behind him, 300 warships hung in space like crystalline daggers, each one capable of reducing a continent to ash. "Begin standard scanning procedures," he ordered his crew. The routine was always the same. Scan for defensive positions, identify population centers, calculate the most efficient bombardment pattern. Most species surrendered before the first shot was fired. Those who didn't rarely lasted more than a few hours. The scanner operator looked up with confusion. "Sir, I'm detecting unusual readings." "Define unusual." "The planet appears to be largely evacuated. Most major cities show minimal life signs. Military installations are present but appear abandoned." Vexthul frowned. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a species that evacuated their homeworld. It suggested a level of organization and advanced planning that primitive worlds simply did not possess. "Perhaps they fled to underground shelters," suggested his tactical officer. "Scan deeper," Vexthul commanded. Meanwhile, 30 light-years away, Colonel Danny Foster watched the same readings from his hidden command post on Kepler 186f. The rocky planet had been humanity's secret for 15 years, ever since the first-generation ships had established colonies beyond the reach of Earth's telescopes. "Phase 1 is complete," he reported to Admiral Morrison through quantum-encrypted channels. "The fleet has arrived at Earth and found exactly what we wanted them to find." The evacuation had been the largest undertaking in human history. Over 3 billion people transported to hidden colonies across a dozen star systems, all while maintaining the illusion of normal planetary activity until the very last moment. The remaining billion volunteers had retreated to deep underground bunkers, ready to play their part in the deception. "How long until they realize it's a trap?" asked Captain Susan Blake, the architect of the evacuation plan. "If they follow standard Zephyrian doctrine, they'll spend at least 6 hours conducting detailed scans before beginning bombardment," Danny replied. "That gives us our window." On Earth, the Zephyrian fleet spread into bombardment formation. Vexthul remained puzzled by the empty cities but assumed the humans had simply gone into hiding. It would make no difference. His weapons could penetrate any bunker, destroy any shelter. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface," reported his communications officer. "Put it through." The face that appeared on screen belonged to Lieutenant Commander Alex Rivera, broadcasting from what appeared to be a military command center. Behind him, technicians worked frantically at control stations while alarm lights flashed red. "This is Earth Defense Command," Alex said, his voice steady despite the obvious stress. "We know you're up there. We know what you want. But we're not going to make it easy for you. Vexthul laughed. The bravado of doomed species always amused him. Your resistance is meaningless, human. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. We tried surrender once, Alex replied. 72 hours ago. You weren't interested in negotiating then. So now we do this the hard way. The transmission cut off. Vexthul shrugged and turned to his weapons officer. Begin planetary bombardment. Target all population centers and military installations. The first volley of energy beams lanced down toward Earth's surface, striking cities that had been home to millions just days before. The weapons were precisely calibrated to cause maximum destruction while preserving basic infrastructure. Standard procedure for a world that would soon become another Zephyrian colony. But as the bombardment continued, something unexpected happened. The attacks were having no strategic effect. The few remaining humans seemed completely unconcerned with the destruction raining down on their empty cities. Instead, they were broadcasting on every frequency, sending messages that made no sense. All stations, this is Terra Command. Operation Lazarus is now active. Repeat, Lazarus is now active. Vexthul had no idea what Operation Lazarus meant, but he was about to find out, across the galaxy. In systems the Zephyrian Empire had never heard of, human fleets began to move. Captain Tony Martinez commanded the first strike force. 12 ships built in secret shipyards using technology. Reverse-engineered from Zephyrian, wreckage found drifting between stars decades. Earlier, the humans had learned to build ships differently than their enemies. Where Zephyrian vessels were massive and powerful, human ships were small, fast, and nearly invisible to enemy sensors. They struck like wolves, hitting supply convoys and communication relays before vanishing back into the void. Target acquired, Tony reported as his squadron approached a Zephyrian logistics depot in the Vega system. 24 supply ships, minimal escort. Beginning attack run. The depot's defenders never saw them coming. Human ships emerged from the asteroid field like ghosts, their weapons silent and deadly. Within minutes, the entire supply convoy was drifting wreckage, their cargo holds full of resources that would never reach Zephyrian forces. Similar attacks erupted across 40 star systems simultaneously. Every supply line, every communication relay, every isolated outpost suddenly found itself under assault by an enemy that shouldn't exist. The Zephyrian Empire had been fighting humans for exactly 6 hours, and they were already losing ships faster than they could count. Back at Earth, Vexthul received the first damage reports with growing alarm. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence showed no human presence beyond their home system. His tactical officer looked up from his displays with panic in his eyes. Sir, we're receiving reports of attacks across the entire outer rim. 17 supply convoys destroyed. 43 communication stations offline, and we've lost contact with patrol fleets in 8 sectors. That's impossible. These primitives don't have the technology for interstellar warfare. Apparently they do, sir. As if summoned by his words, new contacts appeared on the scanner. Human ships smaller than anything in the Zephyrian Navy, but moving with deadly purpose. Major Kate Williams led the first wave, her fighters erupting from what had appeared to be abandoned orbital stations around Earth. Surprise, she said over the radio as her squadron opened fire on the nearest Zephyrian cruiser. The attack caught the aliens completely off guard. Their ships were designed to bombard planets and fight other large vessels, not swarms of small, agile fighters that struck like angry hornets. The first cruiser exploded before its crew even realized they were under attack. Vexthul watched in horror as his perfectly ordered battle formation dissolved into chaos. His ships were taking fire from all directions, and every time they destroyed one human fighter, 2 more seemed to appear from nowhere. Sir, we need to withdraw and regroup, his tactical officer advised. We outnumber them 100 to 1. Yes, sir, but they're not fighting like anything we've encountered before. They're using our size against us, making us targets while they remain mobile. For the first time in his long career, Supreme Commander Vexthul gave an order he had never expected to voice. All ships withdraw to minimum safe distance. We need to reassess the situation. The humans had just accomplished something no species had done in 3,000 years. They had forced a Zephyrian fleet to retreat. Part 3, the news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Zephyrian fleet had retreated. On slave worlds throughout the Empire, beings who had never known hope began to whisper about the impossible. Admiral Ryan Scott stood on the command deck of the human ship Freedom's Edge, watching Kepler 442b grow larger on his screens. The planet had been under Zephyrian control for 800 years, its native population reduced to slave labor and crystal mines that powered the Empire's war machine. "Are you sure about this, Admiral?" asked Captain Beth Cooper, his second-in-command. "We've never attempted to liberate an occupied world before." Ryan nodded grimly. "The whole galaxy is watching us now. If we only attack their supply lines and avoid direct confrontation, we look like cowards. We need to prove that humans don't just hit and run." The plan was bold beyond reason. A single human battle group against an entire planetary defense network, attempting to free a world that had been enslaved for centuries. Every military advisor on Earth had called it suicide, but Ryan understood something they didn't. Wars weren't won by playing it safe. "Begin jamming their communications," he ordered. "I want every Zephyrian on that planet to think they're facing the entire human fleet." The attack began at dawn on Kepler 442b. Human ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons already charging as they dove toward the planet's defense platforms. The Zephyrians had expected hit-and-run tactics, not a direct assault on a fortified world. "This is Admiral Ryan Scott of the Terran Liberation Fleet," he broadcast on all frequencies as his ships engaged the orbital defenses. "To the people of Kepler 442b, your liberation begins now. To the Zephyrian occupiers, you have one chance to surrender." On the planet's surface, a being named Kethmore looked up from the crystal mine where he had worked for 60 years. The blue-scaled native of Kepler 442b had been barely more than a child when the Zephyrians arrived, and he had never imagined he might live to see freedom. The sounds of battle echoed through the mining complex as human fighters screamed overhead, their weapons targeting Zephyrian installations with surgical precision. Around him, other slaves stood frozen in amazement, afraid to believe what they were seeing. "The humans," whispered Velara, an elderly female who had led secret resistance meetings for decades. "They actually came." The Zephyrian guards were in chaos, abandoning their post to join the defensive effort. For the first time in 8 centuries, the slaves of Kepler 442b found themselves unguarded and free to act. Meanwhile, 30 light-years away, Dr. Amanda Walsh made the discovery that would change everything. Working in a hidden laboratory on the human colony of New Geneva Prime, she had been analyzing captured Zephyrian communication equipment for months. "I've got it," she announced to her team, her voice trembling with excitement. "Their entire command structure runs through a single encrypted network. Every order, every troop movement, every supply shipment goes through this system." Her assistant, Dr. Carl Peterson, looked up from his workstation. "Can we break their encryption?" "Already done," Amanda replied, pulling up streams of alien text on her monitors. "It's actually not that sophisticated. They've been using the same codes for centuries because no one ever challenged them before." The implications were staggering. With access to Zephyrian communications, humans could predict every military movement, intercept every order, and coordinate attacks with perfect timing. But Amanda had discovered something even more valuable than tactical intelligence. "They're not just using this network for military communications," she explained to General Craig Barnes via secure transmission. "They're coordinating the entire slave economy. Labor assignments, resource shipments, population transfers, everything." "What does that mean for us?" Craig asked. "It means we have the locations of every prison world, every forced labor camp, every slave population in the Empire. We know exactly where to hit them to cause maximum disruption." The information reached human forces across the galaxy within hours. Captain Sam Garrett, commanding a squadron near the Centauri cluster, immediately changed course for a previously unknown prison moon. Lieutenant Commander Nick Thompson redirected his ships toward a slave labor facility that produced Zephyrian weapons. But the most important piece of intelligence went to Admiral Ryan Scott, still engaged in the battle for Kepler 442b. The planet wasn't just another mining world, it was a critical hub in the Zephyrian supply network. If they could hold it, they could cut off resources to dozens of other systems. "All human ships, this is Admiral Scott," he broadcast to his fleet as they fought through the orbital defenses. "We're not just liberating one world today. We're cutting the heart out of their entire operation." The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships, outnumbered 3-1, used speed and coordination to outmaneuver the heavier Zephyrian defenders. But the real turning point came when the planet's slave population joined the fight. Kethmore led a group of miners in an assault on the main communication center. Their improvised weapons no match for Zephyrian technology, but their determination unstoppable. Filara organized sabotage teams that disabled power generators and weapons factories across the planet. "The slaves are rising," reported Captain Beth Cooper as she watched the surface battles unfold. "Every major installation is under attack from within," Ryan smiled grimly. That's what the Zephyrians never understood about conquest. You can enslave a body, but you can't enslave hope. The final Zephyrian stronghold fell at sunset. Governor Thexval, who had ruled Kepler 442b with absolute authority for 2 centuries, found himself facing a crowd of liberated slaves led by human marines. His surrender was broadcast across the galaxy, the first time a Zephyrian planetary governor had ever been forced to capitulate. "This is Admiral Ryan Scott to all free beings," he announced from the steps of the former governor's palace. "Kepler 442b has been liberated. The Zephyrian Empire is not invincible. Rise up and join us." The message reached slave worlds throughout the galaxy, transmitted by the very communication network Amanda Walsh had cracked. On planets where rebellion had been unthinkable for centuries, beings began to organize resistance movements. Lieutenant Eric Johnson, monitoring communications from his post on the human ship Defiance, reported unprecedented activity. "Admiral, we're detecting coordinated uprisings on at least 40 worlds. The slaves are following our example." What had begun as Earth's desperate fight for survival was becoming something far greater. Humans had done more than prove they could fight the Zephyrian Empire. They had shown every enslaved species in the galaxy that freedom was possible. The war was no longer about human survival. It had become a revolution that would reshape the entire galaxy. And the Zephyrians were finally beginning to understand what they had unleashed when they chose to threaten humanity. As Kethmore stood in the ruins of the crystal mine where he had spent his life in bondage, he looked up at the human ships orbiting his world and spoke words his people had not dared to say for 800 years. "We are free." Part 4. The Zephyrian High Command had ruled an empire for 3 millennia without ever facing a serious threat to their authority. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood before the Council of Elders in their crystal palace on the Imperial homeworld, delivering news that should have been impossible. 47 worlds in open rebellion, he reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the disaster. 32 supply convoys destroyed, 68 communication relays offline, and now they have liberated an entire planetary system. Elder Prime Zexthon, who had lived for over 2,000 years, listened with growing rage. "How is this possible? These humans were unknown to us 6 months ago." "They fight unlike any species we have encountered," Kethvar replied. "They do not seek to conquer territory or claim resources. They exist only to destroy our ability to maintain control. Then we will show them the price of defying the Empire," Zexthon declared. "Assemble the Grand Fleet. We will reduce Earth to molten rock and end this rebellion once and for all." The Grand Fleet was the pride of the Zephyrian Empire, 5,000 warships that had never known defeat. When they moved toward Earth, every species in the galaxy would remember why the Zephyrians had ruled for so long. But Earth was no longer the vulnerable world the aliens had first encountered. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, coordinating the largest defensive operation in human history. "Report from all stations," he ordered, as the massive alien fleet approached the outer edge of the solar system. Captain Jill Roberts, now commanding Earth's orbital defenses, provided the first update. "Asteroid belt weapons are online and ready. We have 15,000 kinetic platforms distributed throughout the belt, each one capable of independent targeting." The asteroid belt had been humanity's greatest engineering project, taking every resource they could spare over the past 6 months. What appeared to be random space debris was actually a precisely coordinated weapons system, each asteroid equipped with guidance systems and propulsion units that could turn rocks into guided missiles. "Long-range sensors show 5,000 enemy ships," reported Lieutenant Commander Nick Thompson from his position on the outer monitoring station. "They're moving in standard battle formation, expecting conventional resistance." Jake nodded grimly. The Zephyrians were about to learn that humans did not fight conventional wars. "All stations, this is Admiral Morrison." He broadcast to defensive positions throughout the solar system. "Operation Hammer is now active. Show them what happens when you threaten our home. The Grand Fleet entered the asteroid belt expecting to sweep aside any orbital defenses and proceed directly to Earth. Supreme Admiral Kethvar had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same tactics, overwhelming enemy forces with sheer numbers and firepower. Begin advance bombardment of the inner system, he ordered as his fleet spread into attack formation. Destroy anything that might pose a threat. The first asteroid seemed to move naturally, pulled by the gravitational effects of the massive alien ships. Kethvar paid them no attention as chunks of rock drifted closer to his fleet. Space was full of debris, and his ship's shields could easily deflect anything the size of a small mountain. Then the asteroids began to accelerate. Commander Greg Turner, hidden in a control bunker on Ceres, watched his tactical display as 15,000 pieces of weaponized space debris came alive simultaneously. Each asteroid had been carefully positioned and programmed with precise targeting data. What the Zephyrians saw as random rocks were actually guided weapons that had been waiting for this moment. All platforms, engage at will, Greg commanded. The asteroid belt erupted into motion as thousands of rocks suddenly became missiles, their hidden engines igniting to propel them toward the alien fleet at tremendous speed. The Zephyrians found themselves surrounded by a cloud of guided projectiles, each one aimed at a different ship. Impossible, breathed Kethvar as he watched asteroids the size of city blocks slam into his vessels. His shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, offered little protection against solid matter moving at significant fractions of light speed. The first wave of kinetic impacts destroyed over 300 ships in minutes. The second wave, targeting vessels that had survived the initial assault, eliminated another 500. The pride of the Zephyrian Empire was being torn apart by rocks and ice that had been turned into weapons. All ships emergency maneuvers, Kethvar ordered, but there was nowhere to run. The asteroid belt surrounded his fleet on all sides, and every piece of debris had become a potential threat. Captain Tony Martinez watched the battle from his hidden position on Europa, coordinating the human fleet that had been waiting in the shadows of Jupiter's moons. As the Zephyrian formation disintegrated under the kinetic bombardment, human ships emerged from their hiding places to finish what the asteroids had started. "This is for every world you enslaved," Tony said as his squadron opened fire on the surviving alien vessels. The Battle of the Asteroid Belt lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the grand fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was nothing but drifting wreckage. Less than 200 ships escaped the carnage, limping away from a solar system that had become their graveyard. Supreme Admiral Kethvar transmitted his final message from the bridge of his dying flagship. "You have destroyed 5,000 ships and 50 million personnel. This act of barbarism will be remembered." Admiral Morrison's response was broadcast across every communication channel in known space. "We didn't start this war, but we're going to finish it. Every world you've enslaved will be free. Every species you've oppressed will have justice. This is what happens when you threaten Earth." The destruction of the Grand Fleet sent shockwaves throughout the Zephyrian Empire. For the first time in their history, they faced an enemy that could match their strength and exceed their determination. Slave worlds that had remained quiet despite the earlier rebellions now erupted in open revolt. On the Imperial homeworld, Elder Prime Zexthon stared at the reports of complete military disaster. Half a century of ship construction had been eliminated in a single battle by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked his remaining military advisors. "Approximately 8,000 vessels scattered across the Empire," came the reply. "But most are tied up fighting rebellions on the slave worlds. And the humans? Unknown. Our intelligence suggests they have been hiding their true capabilities from the beginning. Every assumption we made about their technology has proven wrong. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had grown through conquest and intimidation. They had never faced an enemy that fought with the desperation of the cornered or the innovation of the desperate. They had certainly never encountered a species that could turn an entire star system into a weapon. As reports continued to arrive of human fleets liberating world after world, Zexthon realized that the war was no longer about conquering Earth. It had become a fight for the very survival of the empire they had spent millennia building. The humans had kept their promise. They were showing the galaxy exactly how to fight a war, Part 5. The news of the Grand Fleet's destruction reached every corner of the galaxy within days. On slave worlds throughout the Zephyrian Empire, beings who had lived in fear for centuries suddenly found courage they never knew they possessed. The impossible had happened, and now anything seemed possible. Captain Sam Garrett stood on the bridge of the human ship Liberation, watching as another Zephyrian garrison surrendered without firing a shot. The fortress world of Rigel 7 had been considered impregnable, but its defenders had lost the will to fight after learning what happened to their Grand Fleet. That makes 43 worlds liberated in the past month, reported his communications officer. Resistance movements are active on over 200 more. Sam nodded, but his expression remained grim. Victory was within reach. But the final phase of the war would be the most dangerous. Cornered enemies often became desperate, and desperate enemies did unpredictable things. On the Imperial homeworld of Zephyr Prime, Elder Prime Zexthon faced the collapse of everything his species had built. The crystal towers that had stood for millennia now seemed fragile, their beauty meaningless in the face of total military defeat. The Outer Rim is completely lost, reported his chief advisor. The Mid-Rim worlds are in open rebellion. Only the core systems remain under our control, and even those are wavering. Zexthon walked to the great window overlooking the capital city. Below him, Zephyrian citizens went about their daily lives, unaware that their empire was crumbling. They had lived so long as the masters of the galaxy that they could not comprehend becoming anything else. "What of our remaining fleets?" he asked, scattered and demoralized. Many commanders are refusing orders, claiming they need to defend their home systems. "The humans have broken our command structure." "Then we have no choice," Zexthon said quietly. "Activate the final protocol." His advisor recoiled in horror. "Elder Prime, that weapon has never been tested. The consequences could be catastrophic. More catastrophic than the fall of our empire. If we cannot rule the galaxy, then perhaps no one should." The final protocol was the Zephyrian Empire's ultimate weapon, a device capable of destabilizing stars and causing them to go supernova. It had been built in secret over centuries, intended as a deterrent against any force that might threaten their rule. Now, facing defeat for the first time in their history, they were prepared to use it, but the Zephyrians had forgotten that humans were very good at gathering intelligence. Dr. Amanda Walsh, still monitoring their communications from her hidden laboratory, detected the activation sequence for an unknown weapons system. "Admiral Morrison, we have a problem," she reported via encrypted transmission. "They're powering up something called the final protocol. The energy readings are unlike anything we've seen before." Jake Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as Amanda described the weapon's capabilities. A device that could destroy entire star systems was beyond anything humans had prepared for. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Based on the power buildup, maybe 72 hours before it's fully charged." Jake was quiet for a moment, remembering the ultimatum that had started this war. The Zephyrians had given humanity 72 hours to surrender or face destruction. Now the situation was reversed, but the stakes were infinitely higher. "Get me Admiral Scott and Captain Garrett on a priority channel," he ordered. "We need to end this war before they can use that weapon." The final assault on Zephyr Prime began 18 hours later. Every available human ship converged on the Imperial homeworld, supported by fleets from liberated worlds across the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for centuries fought side by side against their former oppressors. Admiral Ryan Scott led the main attack force, his ships diving through the planet's defensive network with ruthless efficiency. The orbital platforms that had protected Zephyr Prime for millennia crumbled under the combined assault of humans and their allies. "This is Admiral Scott to all Zephyrian forces," he broadcast, as his fleet approached the planet. "Surrender now and your lives will be spared. Continue fighting and face the consequences of your choice." But Elder Prime Zexthon was beyond reason. From his command center deep beneath the capital city, he watched the human ships descend toward his world and made his final decision. "Activate the final protocol," he ordered. "If we cannot have victory, we will have vengeance." The weapon began its startup sequence, drawing power from the planet's core and converting it into energy capable of destabilizing the system's star. In 60 minutes, Zephyr Prime's sun would begin the process that would destroy everything within 20 light years. Colonel Amy Davis led the ground assault on the capital city, her Marines fighting through desperate defenders who knew they were protecting more than just their government. If the humans reached the command center, the Zephyrian Empire would truly be finished. The weapon is in the deepest levels of the complex, she reported as her forces advanced through the crystal corridors. We're meeting heavy resistance, but we're making progress. Time was running out. The final protocol continued its countdown, while human forces fought their way deeper into the Imperial stronghold. With 30 minutes remaining, Amy's team reached the sealed blast doors protecting the command center. Breach charges ready, reported Sergeant Billy Matthews. But those doors are designed to withstand planetary bombardment. Then we don't go through them, Amy replied, studying the building's layout. We go around them. The assault team used mining charges to blow a hole through the solid rock surrounding the command center, bypassing the defensive barriers entirely. They emerged into the control room with 15 minutes remaining on the countdown. Elder Prime Zexthon stood before the weapons control panel, his hand hovering over the final activation switch. You are too late, humans. In moments, this entire system will be consumed by fire. And you along with it, Amy pointed out. Is destroying everyone really worth preserving your pride? We ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. If we cannot continue to rule it, then it deserves to burn. That's where you're wrong, Amy said, raising her weapon. The galaxy doesn't belong to you or to us. It belongs to everyone who calls it home. The shot echoed through the command center as Zexthon fell. Amy rushed to the control panel, frantically searching for a way to stop the countdown. With seconds remaining, she found the emergency shutdown and slammed her fist down on the control. The final protocol powered down with a mechanical whine that seemed to echo through the entire planet. The Zephyrian Empire's last weapon fell silent, taking with it their final hope of victory. In the aftermath, President Rachel Miller stood before the assembled representatives of 200 liberated worlds, announcing the formation of the Galactic Freedom Alliance. The Age of Empire was over and the Age of Cooperation had begun. Admiral Pete Lawrence became the Alliance's first Supreme Commander, tasked with ensuring that no single species would ever again dominate the galaxy. The human fleet that had begun as Earth's desperate defense became the guardian of galactic freedom. As the ceremony concluded, Jake Morrison looked up at the stars and remembered the message that had started it all. The Zephyrians had chosen war, and humanity had indeed shown them how to fight it. But more importantly, they had shown the galaxy how to win it.